Okay. So we usually don't talk about celebrity divorces on the show. Why? Because it's the same thing that we always say. You should not compare your story to somebody else's. It's like we always say, Andrea and I, do you ever go to the doctor and say, I'll have what she's having, or I have the same thing going on as my neighbor? You don't do that, and you shouldn't do it in divorce. But, however, in the stories that we're going to unpack for you today, you're going to hear how these famous divorces have crossover themes that you might see in your own divorce.
And to help us with this discussion, we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Kara Kroback. She's a shareholder and family law attorney, which, oh, I didn't even ask how to pronounce the name of the firm. God, I'm so good. Kara, pop in and pronounce the name of the firm for me.
It's called Buckhalter.
So I'm so glad you said that. So Buckhalter at their Denver, Colorado office. Kara specializes in high net worth and ultra high net worth, aren't we fancy, divorces. So think of Kara as the attorney you want if you've got some real interesting money stuff going on. She's a brand new guest to our show, but I have a feeling that you will be hearing a lot from her in the future. So, Kara Kroback, welcome to How Not to Suck at Divorce.
Thank you. Super happy to be here.
So, Kara, let's just jump right in. We're so happy we're chatting with you today, but we want to get into these celebrity stories. I think we've all seen them on the, in the news, in the smut magazines, etc. But we're starting with one that's really relevant right now, which is JLo, Jennifer Lopez, for those of you who need an explanation, and Ben Affleck. Quite frankly, it's probably for another day, but I'm just shocked that they got together again for, the 19th time and then actually got married. To me, as a divorce lawyer, I'm thinking dumb, 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 but here we are keeping us in business with another divorce. So, Kara, let's start there and tell us what's so interesting about their divorce beyond all the memes we've seen on the internet.
I mean, there's so much interesting about their divorce. Honestly, the fact JLo filed pro se, I find really interesting. Personally, being a divorce lawyer, because one could read into that many different things.
Now,
But
tell everybody what pro se means for those
sure.
people who don't
Yep.
know.
Yep. So that means she didn't have a lawyer. And I mean, one would expect that she has 15 lawyers on the ready, and she's been, having conversations with lawyers all summer. So I just think that's a really interesting fact. And you have to wonder, I think JLo is somebody who likely is thinking very intentionally about everything that she does. And so there has to be a message or a purpose behind her filing pro se, but I don't know what it is, obviously. But that to me is really interesting as a divorce lawyer. But I think the most interesting part of JLo's current divorce is the fact that she and Ben apparently didn't have a prenup, which I think is very surprising given her marital history.
Okay,
I
you
mean,
can't get a prenup if you get married in like 2 days, which is what she did, basically, right? She was like, all right, Alex Rodriguez, goodbye. We're breaking up. Ben Affleck, I've been with you a few times. Let's get back together. And oh, by the way, tomorrow we get married. We don't have time for a prenup.
well, let me
Like,
ask you guys this. On average, how long? Well, maybe not on average because they're not an average case, but for like a celebrity who has a lot to protect, how long is a prenup process from the time they go in and they're like, look, I'm about to propose to my boo tomorrow. Can you write me up a prenup? How does that work?
I'm gonna defer to Kara on this, and then I'm gonna let you know what my thoughts are.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. And I think that the opinions on that vary even amongst the attorneys in Colorado, because one of the things that a court will look at when they're evaluating whether a prenup's enforceable or valid is whether it was entered into under duress. And so when a court's looking at whether there was duress, they're looking at how long a party has had to kind of negotiate, think it through, work on terms with one another. So I have seen prenups done relatively fast, maybe within a month, but I also know of some colleagues in the legal profession that will not do them within 3 months or within 6 months. And so it really depends, and it's, I think, a matter of opinion as a lawyer how comfortable you are with the risk that it might not be found to be enforceable. So it wouldn't surprise me for JLo and Ben if they could get it cranked out very fast, but also I would expect that they would need some time to really hammer out the hard details because of their estate.
I totally agree with you. So where we are in Chicago, our biggest issue with our court cases, first of all, prenups are rarely overturned. So know that where we are. And also, the biggest thing for a prenup for its validity is, did you have disclosure, full disclosure? Did you leave anything out? And that's where things get a little tricky, especially with these really high net worth, celebrities, business owners, et cetera. It's really, did we disclose everything? And a lot of times these people have so many holdings, so many assets, that disclosure can be pretty tricky, even if they have a huge team of financial people working with them. And that can take a long time. So then you have to do that plus the negotiation, and that's where things get a little tricky and then the process gets a little lengthier. Like Kara said, I agree. She's probably got a team of people. You could probably hammer it out within a week or two if everybody was on their A game, handing over everything they had to do. But here they don't have one. So that definitely puts a wrinkle in the divorce.
I was going to ask, you were saying about disclosures, Morgan. Is it because people genuinely forget something because they have so much going on? Or is it also people are like, oh, I really don't want them to know about this other account. So let's kind of push that away.
So the problems, I see both. I've seen both, I should say. But really, the only time that a court is going to really throw out a prenup, there's a few other times that really, in where I am in Chicago, that don't happen a lot. The biggest issue is disclosure or non-disclosure. And what I usually see is they forget something big is left off. And what the court generally says is, well, then how could someone enter into a good agreement if they didn't know you had X, Y, and Z on the side? So that's the quickest way where we are to kind of have a potential claim to throw out a prenup. So I always harp on my clients. And whenever I speak on this issue, it's over disclosure. I don't even care. Hand over every financial document you can. For when I have clients who are billionaires, we put into the agreement, they are a billionaire. They are worth $1 billion more. So there's no, fantasy about what the potential estate could be. We're still going to do all the disclosures, but you should know that payment of any type is not an issue because they have so much money.
It sounds so much like my own divorce. It's
Mm.
weird
Mm.
hearing it. Okay, back to Benifer. What so okay, so she's representing herself, which, I say go girl. Just kidding. I really would love to be a fly on the wall in those meetings. Just to I picture her like with a backup singer and like a head mic.
Okay, wait, but I have to say, because people are probably like, oh, why is it so weird as a divorce lawyer that she would be representing herself? So, Kara, give me some conspiracy theories in a divorce lawyer's brain as to why she might have filed pro se. I've got a few conspiracy theories myself.
Oh, this is gonna be so good.
Yeah, so I love a good conspiracy theory. I mean, do not get me started on Princess Diana because we'll be here all day. I think that she wanted to file on their anniversary of their wedding, which is what she did. And I think that she has like 15 divorce lawyers she's consulting with and hasn't picked who she wants to represent her. So she just decided to file on her own and she's going to be having a lawyer step in subsequent time. That's my theory right now.
Okay. All right. That's a good theory. My theory is she wants public sympathy. So she wants to be like, oh, poor me. I filed on my wedding date. This marriage fell apart and I'm not lawyered up because if you go in guns blazing with the lawyer, then the public may think like, what a jerk she is. Here's the thing. My conspiracy theory is she's got a lawyer. She's got a lawyer sitting there helping her. She didn't go to the courthouse. She wasn't figuring out herself how to fill out this paperwork, but she wanted the public sympathy. And or my second conspiracy theory is sometimes people file pro se when they have lots of money just to try to extend an olive branch to the other side to be saying to them, "Oh, let's make this super nice." But I'm going with my first conspiracy theory. I think it's a public, display where she doesn't want to be perceived as the jerk.
I wonder if everyone's a little bit right here. I feel like there's always a little bit knowing the history that we know, and I don't want to Freud this chick because we don't really know her, but I think history kind of shows that she does not shy away from attention. So I think it could be that. I'm wondering how contentious is this divorce going to be? Because I don't even know, actually. I have not paid attention to why really, what really happened and all of that stuff. But let's go back to what's going to happen or what you see could be a big issue, Kara, as they navigate this.
So if they don't, in fact, have a prenup in California, it's a community property state. And my understanding, obviously, I practice in Colorado, but my understanding of that is that what's marital or community property is going to be divided 50-50. So they were only married a couple of years. And I think that most people would assume, well, there can't be that much community property at stake since they've only been married a short amount of time. But in a state like California, when you're dividing assets 50-50, and if you're coming to the marriage with hundreds of millions of dollars each, the likelihood that you're going to have a significant marital estate is very high. And so I think that, obviously my sleuthing on the gossip magazines is that they both have had significant projects and movies that they have made during the time that they were married. So there could be a significant amount of assets that end up fighting over in California.
Right. And one of the connections, for our listeners as to why we're talking about this, where this might be relevant to you, I see a lot of people come to me and say, well, we can, it's a short marriage and we both make good money and we kept all of our assets separate. So we should just like move on. And unfortunately, I have to say, as a divorce lawyer, you really got to know what state you're in and what the state says, because where I am and likely where Kara is, I don't want to speak for you, but any dollar made post marriage, no matter where you put it, is marital. So that's probably what we're talking about with JLo and, Ben Affleck, which is if they had some good projects bringing in good money during the time they were married, did they invest that money? Where is that money? Because that's subject to division. Am I talking correctly for Colorado, Kara?
You are, but I would add to that, Morgan, that in Colorado, we're an equitable division state. So we're not a community property state. And what that means is that we will not always have 50-50 division of a marital estate. So if you file for divorce in Colorado, you've only been married for a couple of years. And for example, one of you brings, 400 million to the marriage and the other brings 100, hypothetically speaking, like JLo and Ben, a court in Colorado is much more likely to say, you guys are both going to walk away with the assets that you're bringing because it's equitable and it's entirely in the discretion of the judge in Colorado. And so that's a big distinction I would make between states that you might find is that some states and some judges, some courts might care a lot more about how the assets were acquired and what you're walking away with than courts in other jurisdictions.
I agree, because the court where we are would consider it, but ultimately probably isn't leaning as equitable as your state. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. This one is absolutely fascinating. We have Channing Tatum, I've got them backwards, his divorce and the issues surrounding something called intellectual property with his movie. If you have been on this earth, maybe you've seen it, Magic Mike. So what are we talking about there?
Wait,
Yes.
yeah, this is exciting though. But Morgan, speaking of Magic Mike, aren't we still waiting to hear back from them? Weren't we doing some sort of sponsor deal with Magic Mike?
Yeah, I think you're going to need to follow up on that one.
Can you imagine this episode is sponsored by the makers of Magic Mike? Work all day, work it all night. That is actually their real tagline. Work
Stop
all
it.
day. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, all right. So before Andrea starts stripping, let's actually talk about the Channing Tatum divorce. Kara, take it away.
Oh man, how do I follow that? Okay, so this one's actually really interesting from a divorce lawyer perspective. So at issue in Channing and Jenna Dewan's divorce, they, at least according to her camp, Jenna is claiming that she and Channing together came up with the concept of Magic Mike during their marriage. And so as a result of that, the intellectual property, the concept of Magic Mike is a marital asset and should be divided, pursuant to the community property division in California. What she's also arguing, though, is that the concept of Magic Mike as intellectual property extends to subsequent sequels of that movie, to franchises, to the show in Vegas, et cetera, et cetera. And so she's claiming that the Magic Mike intellectual property is huge. And Channing is claiming that the intellectual property that actually was acquired during their marriage was limited to Magic Mike, the original film, and that things that are being built on top of that original concept are his separate and different intellectual property that was acquired after they legally separated and legally divorced. And so what's really interesting about this case, I mean, not everybody obviously is married to an actor who plays a stripper in a movie, but it can be relevant to a lot of different people throughout the United States because there could be intellectual property issues that could be subject to, a court trying to determine what constitutes property and how much of that property, when that property began, and at what point in time does that intellectual property stop.
Okay, so super interesting also for our listeners. I want to liken it to one other thing that probably some listeners are going through. So, although it might, you might not have intellectual property, maybe you're not based out of LA or New York or whatever, but what I see a lot where this issue comes into play is whether a business or business interests are marital or non-marital. So, liken it the same way. So, you work with your spouse and you come up with a business idea. Let's just say it's right after your marriage. That business idea takes off. You grow this business. You're wondering, is that business marital or non-marital? Maybe your spouse is saying, I put non-marital money in it, so it's non-marital. Maybe you're saying, I helped you build this, it's marital. That's for the court to determine. But what if you go that extra step, which is exactly what Kara is talking about? So then that successful business spins off and says, well, I'm going to start making, Stanley cups because we have all this extra cash. We might as well spin this business off into something else. Is the Stanley Cup business now marital or non-marital? And so you have this big tracing issue and a big, big issue for the court to determine. So that's where a person who's listening to this show, if you're not from LA or New York and dealing with intellectual property, might see this issue popping up. Is that right, Kara?
I would totally agree with you, but I would also say that I don't think you need to be in LA or New York to be dealing with intellectual property. I think in this day and age with the name and image and likeness issues that we're now seeing, Instagram influencers, bloggers, authors, individuals who are creating, intellectual property isn't limited to making movies, but it can really run the gamut. And so it could pop itself up, but I think it's important to even note that that's something that may need to be discussed both during a divorce, but also, if you're contemplating a prenup, that should be something that you're thinking about then too.
So what I want to understand, and I'm going to go back to the divorce, the Channing Tatum divorce, just to keep it like clear here. So how does one argue your case? So what is it that I understand that she is saying this entire concept and all of the spinoffs are from the 4 dinner conversations we had together where I suggested this and then you said, yes, and let's do this. So therefore, this is our idea. I own half of this. Okay. And he's saying, well, no, we came up with the first thing together, but everything else after that is mine. What do the attorneys do to argue both cases? Because in my brain, I see it as I don't know how you prove this stuff. It seems to be just all gray, like all nuances. Because I'm thinking if somebody asked me, well, I don't know, logically, it does kind of feel like if you came up with the original concept and then everything from that is a spinoff, I don't know if she, in my brain, would be entitled to half of all of that, but at least a percentage because the Vegas show would not exist at all without that original concept. So how do people figure this stuff out?
Kara, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that you would involve experts to likely do some valuations. You would probably, each side would have their own expert who would have competing valuations to show, like you were saying, if you don't have 50%, then maybe it's a percentage of each fractional amount subsequent to the original concept. And you would just, I think in Colorado, there's not a lot of case law that really indicates how this would play out. I think you would rely very heavily on what the law says in terms of when a property interest starts and what makes a property interest end. To counter your point, though, I think that it's also, Channing's camp is going to say, well, our franchise or our show in Vegas involved significant sweat, blood, and tears to create this new show that you weren't even involved with at all. We had to get all these investors, we had to hire all these people. And, the value for that is actually a completely different entity. And so I can really see both sides of this argument, which is why I find it such an interesting fact pattern.
But the sweat and equity, I'm sorry, the sweat and equity, though, that's not intellectual property, right? 'Cause I that's where I think I get confused, Morgan. Help me understand that part. Is the sweat equity also intellectual property?
Well, I mean, yes and no, right? It would be marital, potentially marital property. The marital estate, at least where I am, may be entitled to what's called a reimbursement because that person is working full time away from the marriage, making a great living, and the marital estate was maybe not properly compensated. So this is probably where I am the trickiest part of the law for tracing and analysis and business valuations. And where I am, Kara says where she is that there's not a lot of case law on it. Where I am, there's a lot of case law, but a lot of contradictory case law. And not only is it a little contradictory, it's super nuanced. So it's like, one case really has some hard line facts, but they're dealing with potentially blockbuster movie stores and all those things. The other one's dealing with a construction case. So we're talking about super different facts where the court may be finding in different ways. So what I would suggest to you, whoever's listening, if you have anything like an intellectual property issue, a marital business, something that you think you've been contributing to during the marriage, this is where you really need a good lawyer that you need to be up to speed on what the law is in your state. Because I think state to state, it's going to be very different. And what you need to prove could be different.
Let's take that one step further, Morgan, because one thing that you and I talk about over and over and over again on this show is that who you hire to represent you sets the stage, no magic Mike pun intended, but sets the stage for how you work it all night. No, but for how this whole thing is gonna go, right? So if you do own a business with your soon to be ex spouse, and this business started once you were married and you played a pivotal role in getting this thing off the ground, do you need to make sure that your attorney has a lot of experience working cases like that? And what would be the right way to find out? What's the question they ask?
Kara, what do you think?
Absolutely. And I would say, I wouldn't even say that you needed to have played a pivotal role in the business getting started. In Colorado, it's equitable, and the court's going to look at the role you played as a spouse, regardless of what specific role you played as a bookkeeper to your spouse's electrical company. The court's going to look to whether you were doing laundry and providing childcare and cleaning the house, and all of that will be factored into a division. And so even if you didn't play a significant role in the business and development of the business itself, absolutely, when you have a business interest, it is very important to make sure you have a very good divorce attorney who is savvy with handling business valuations.
And how would you
Exactly.
find that out? What do you ask, you guys?
You want to ask them right off the bat, how many times have you done a business valuation where you've worked with an expert? What does the law look like? These are questions they should be able to answer. And one thing I know, Andrea, you and I love action steps. So one thing I would say to the listener, if you're like, oh my gosh, this is totally hitting home for me, and I need to go talk to a lawyer about this. One thing you can do to get in front of it, be prepared, maybe draft a timeline. It doesn't have to be completely accurate, but from your knowledge of everything from maybe potentially when the business was started, what your contributions were, what their contributions were, whether you think that the business is worth some certain valuation amount, all these little details so that when you're in your divorce lawyer's office and you're going to be a little anxious, that's just normal. You're going to have things written down so the divorce lawyer can maybe take those things and run and be a little more organized.
And let me add to that because I'm the queen of rushing through things that are uncomfortable. If you do have a business and there's probably money sitting there, I would encourage you don't rush through this timeline. Morgan loves timelines. I fucking hate timelines. I think they're the dumbest fucking thing. But Morgan thinks they're important, so I say do it. But if it's something that you're like, I don't want to do this, then you need to have someone who knows what they're doing, probably your attorney or maybe an associate or somebody there to really do that with you. So you're not doing it half assed, like, well, I don't know, maybe here or maybe there, because those tiny little details can actually be pretty important.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so let's move on to the next celebrity divorce that is kind of relevant right now, which is making me laugh because it's my absolute favorite. We are talking about, yes, folks, we are talking about Billy Ray Cyrus.
Billy Ray Cyrus, because somebody broke his achy breaky heart.
And I want my mullet back because yes, that apparently is a song. I just Googled it. I
No,
wanted
it's
to know
not.
what he's
No,
yes,
it's
it is.
not.
Yes, it is. It is Billy Ray Cyrus. I want my mullet back. It is from the album Wanna Be Your Joe, 2006. Boom.
You know we gotta have Pamela edit that song in, you guys. It'll be worth whatever we have to pay because I gotta hear that. That's
Mm.
gonna be good.
So
Right.
good. Okay. Shara, let's get into this.
What happened with him?
Yeah, as my husband says, Miley Cyrus's dad, because for the generation who has no idea what we're talking about and what we're referring to. But yeah, so Billy Ray was married to a woman named Fire Rose, and I don't know a ton about but it was a very short marriage.
How would I? Why would I?
Would I? In what world would this be relevant to
Why
my
do we
business?
care?
I don't know, but I know way too much as it is just from being myself. Anyway, so he was married to a woman named Fire Rose, and who they were
Can
not.
I just stop you there? If you're
Yeah.
married to a woman named Fire Rose, are you shocked you're getting divorced like right away?
Wait, we're saying her name is Fire Rose or Vira Rose?
Fire Rose, one word.
Fire. That's one word.
That's even worse. That is even worse. I did not even know that. Fire
That
Rose
sounds
is one word.
that
I mean,
sounds
of
like my
course you
magic Mike stage
Yeah.
name. And up next, everybody, we've got Fire Rose.
That sounds
$100.
like an STD. I don't know.
I'm
It's
sorry
fine.
to tell you, you are diagnosed with Fire Rose.
You know what? A quick round of antibiotics and that rose will no longer be on fire.
Oh, God.
Okay,
Okay.
so give us
So
give us the details
Yeah.
with good old Fire Rose, and I want my mullet back.
Yes, I don't know who Fire Rose is or what the background is for her stage name, but so they were married a really short period of time. She right after he filed for divorce, apparently started blowing up their joint credit card. And so he started filing a bunch of motions in court saying, the spending is out of control and it has to stop. And I got to shut her off my credit card immediately because she's going bonkers. And in response, she says, "This is my normal spending. This is what I established during our marriage, and nothing that I'm doing is anything that's in excess or extreme." They ended up settling their case, and I think they've subsequently finalized their divorce. But I think that fact pattern is something that I at least see, Morgan. I don't know about you. I see that all of the time, especially when a divorce starts. And I've seen both sides of it. One side say, representing the party who's saying spending has gotten out of control because they're trying to establish a higher level of spending to show a court that they need a certain amount for maintenance or alimony. And then I've been on the other side where I have the spouse saying, my spending is just what it's always been. And he's trying to cut me off or she's trying to cut me off because they don't want to be stuck paying this higher alimony amount. So I just think it's a very interesting, applicable fact pattern because we see it a lot in divorce cases.
Yeah, I hear that completely. And the things that I vaguely saw some of the headlines, and it's funny because when divorce lawyers, at least good ones who have dealt with celebrities before, see these headlines, you know in your head that there's so much more going on than it's being talked about. There's so many more things.
Totally.
For instance, a lot of times when celebrities get divorced, the whole divorce, the media doesn't know anything. I mean, we're negotiating behind the scenes before we even tell the media that they're getting divorced. And then at times we will get them divorced on the same day we tell them the media. But regardless, so one of the things that I saw with Billy Ray Cyrus is he was all upset that, Fire Rose was spending on his credit card. But the sums that she was spending on a credit card just kind of seemed low for a celebrity. And, I don't know how much his achy breaky heart is bringing in or whatever, but I do know the differences in spending and the clients that I have. And what he was getting all agitated about, I think, was like a spending of $30,000 a month on a credit card. Now, that sounds crazy, right? But for these level of people and usually their expenditures, that's not that bad. So I don't know if one, he's broke, or two, he was just upset because Fire Rose, went off the deep end, or three, it was a lawyer telling him, like, go in and say she's spending like crazy. But at the end of the day, my biggest question is, well, Billy Ray, you married a woman named Fire Rose and you had no prenup. This is a you problem, man. I don't even know what you were thinking here. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I obviously, to each their own, Fire Rose, right? I'm not here to make judgments about Billy Ray's marriage choices, but I do think that what's really, by and large, interesting about the situation is that maintenance or alimony is so fact dependent. And so, what courts will look at is like really depends on the situation that a parties are in. At least in Colorado, courts are going to be looking at your age. They want to know, what assets you brought to the marriage. They want to know what your spending was. They want to know what your actual needs are. What's your monthly rent payment? What are your, actual electrical bills looking like? They want to know whether or not you have an ability to go back out and get a job. So a lot of these facts are going to be taken into account when you're doing this analysis. And it's not as simple as just saying, oh, you're married, therefore you continue to enjoy this really fancy lifestyle because you happen to, win the lotto with old Billy Ray, right? So it's not just as easy as simply saying you're going to get maintenance because you married rich.
Agreed. Let me ask you this, because you might know this more than I do, but how long were they married? They weren't married that long. That's why I was saying I think that they should have had a prenup, but wasn't it short, super
Right.
short?
Yeah, I think it was really short. I think it was shorter than Jen and Ben's, which is saying something.
You
Are we talking
guys,
are we talking months or years?
I think it was like a year. Are
you
you?
guys,
In
she's
fact,
really pretty.
she is.
Oh, she is pretty.
Mhm.
Okay.
I don't know. Here's the thing. What I'm wondering is maybe Fireball Rose knew that she wouldn't get a lot in maintenance because they weren't married that long. And so maybe she thought I should, oh, and she's 8 years sober. Mazel tov to Fire Rose. But I wonder if her thinking is I better spend the money while I can now because I'm not going to walk away with a lot when this whole thing is said and done, you know? Is that I mean, that's a possibility. I'm just saying. I mean, but look from this image, it doesn't look like she's hurting. She's got like full face of makeup. She's got a blowout. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say good for her because we never want to condone people who are like taking advantage of, anything. But I just wonder, there's always so many sides to this
Oh, there
story.
could be so many sides. She could be a lovely, lovely woman, and he could be
She
an
looks so
awful, awful
lovely.
husband. You
Oh,
never
she's
know.
Australian.
She is. I did know that she's an Aussie. Yes.
Yeah, she's an Aussie. I don't know. I kinda always thought as Billy Ray Cyrus is kind of a chode, you know?
Oh my
Like, I don't
gosh. So,
right?
yeah, and you've read all these kind of crazy things about family disputes and all the things. So
Yeah.
I tend to wonder what's going on, but at the end of the day, unless we're living with them like any divorce, we truly don't know what goes on behind closed doors. So I'm not judging either. It's more for entertainment. I'm making fun of Fire Rose for entertainment because that is quite the name.
I want
But
the name.
she could be lovely, he could be horrible. I don't know. But at the end of the day, again, prenup, 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 if you have a lot of assets to protect. So,
So, but let's bring the Billy Ray situation into like an everyday life, okay? Because I think that this happens all the time. And Morgan, something that we used to joke around about because it's a thing that happens up here where I live. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of this, Kara, but it's the grocery store gift card thing where
Oh, tell me
what?
more.
Oh
oh,
my god,
girl.
I hope all of your clients are listening right now because here's a hot take. Here, pro tip. No, this is what a lot of the women out here do while they're getting divorced. And I'm not saying you should go and do it, wink, wink. But they go to the grocery store and they get all the stuff for their family, but they also stop off at the gift card aisle and they get Nordstrom, whatever else they need, and they buy a boatload of gift cards and then they just keep it because look, most of the time the other spouse isn't going to say, well, why did you spend $250 at Kroger? They just assume like it's groceries. And then you stockpile all these gift cards and then you later use it and get whatever you want. So that is a thing up
Where did
here.
you learn that? Like, is that on
I
Facebook?
Oh, why are you acting like I did it? I would never.
Where would
I don't
one have
even
heard?
shop at Nordstrom.
Where would one have heard of such a strategy?
I don't know, definitely not from my Instagram. No, I'm just kidding. I never thought
It's very possible that people would do that in Colorado, and I'm just too ignorant to notice it. I would just be like, "Oh yeah, grocery expense," right on. I wouldn't have even that just blew my mind.
You know what
It
else they used to do too? I mean, I see this all the time. The gift cards are big. The other thing they used to do, and I think the grocery stores are wising up on it, but they would go and then they would say, okay, my grocery bill's $250. Let's make it $350. Just give me $100 back in cash. And the grocery store would always do it. I think especially if you were using your debit card and it would look like a grocery bill. And now I remember recently, I think one of my, clients or, somebody doing that or trying to do that. I think the grocery, wherever she was or he was, would only give them $20 back. So it wasn't really getting them far, but definitely a thing.
They're like, I can tell by your checkout. They're like, you've got a lot of ice cream and wine. Your ass is going through a divorce. I ain't giving you shit back. Sorry. But okay, well, let's really get back to this. I know that here in Illinois, at least, we've got like status quo, right? Like while you are going through the divorce process, you live your life. And Morgan, you always say this. If you regularly get Botox, you keep getting your Botox. If you don't regularly go to Greece every other month, then now's not the time to go to Greece, right? But what for someone listening to this and they're like feeling a little overwhelmed because it's like, okay, you assholes, you keep joking around about all of this stuff, but what do I actually do? How do I know that, let's say this, a lot of spouses threaten, I'm going to cut off all the credit cards and you're not going to have access to anything. And then there are people who are like, oh my God, can he or she really do that? What am I about to go up against? Let's talk about that for a minute. Anyone can jump in.
Yeah. So Colorado also has the same status quo during a divorce case while a case is pending. So the same kind of rules apply as what you were articulating from Morgan's prior comments. Can somebody really cut off the credit cards? Yes, they do. They can and they do. And it's shitty, but it happens. Can they do it and not be in violation of a court order? I think that's a question, but that doesn't stop people from doing that sometimes. And so then the challenge is making sure that, your client is able to get access to assets so that they can survive. And sometimes that can take a while because it takes a while to get in front of a judge.
Agreed. So, you just need to make sure that you're talking to your lawyer about the fact that if there's any threats, financial abuse threats going on, sometimes, for instance, recently, last week, I was with a client and we suspect that her ex is going to get abusive financially because of some of the pressures that they're under. And so what I did is I said, listen, you have enough money to live on. It's not a big deal, but we shouldn't wait. We shouldn't sit back and wait for it to happen. We should be prepared. So I asked her permission to draft a motion or a petition for the court just to get in front of it should something happen. Because don't forget, I'm a firm believer in legally to be ahead of things. You don't want to be behind the eight ball. You want to be the one in front of it. So if you see these things happening or your gut's telling you something isn't right, that's when you want to be talking to your lawyer about strategy.
I completely agree.
I think that that's helpful, and I'm glad we did that. Okay, I want to go back to a minute about the prenup because we spent a lot of time in this episode talking about how important that is, and also a lot of people don't have them. I don't know what the percentage is, and I don't know if either one of you know what the percentage is. Well, actually, let me ask you this. In the cases that you guys are working on right now, what percentage have a prenup versus don't?
I would say for me, 15 to 20% have a prenup currently.
Okay, that's not a lot. Kara, what do you see?
I would say probably closer to 50%, but that's also because a lot of the clientele that I have are individuals who, have a lot of assets to be protecting at the beginning of their marriage. I would say, though, that the likelihood of a prenup increases significantly for people who have already been married once before.
Agreed.
So I routinely get phone calls from prior clients who are saying, hey, I'm getting married again. Let's talk about a prenup because they understand the utility having walked through what a mess a divorce can be if you don't have one.
Right. And I want to clarify one thing. I mean, remember, I'm doing divorces. So I'm saying 15 to 20% of my divorces have a prenup, which, supposes the fact that they got one years ago. But I have a huge clientele of prenups that we're drafting and negotiating now, more than I've ever had before. So I will tell you that where I am, prenups are on the upswing. It's not a taboo conversation anymore. It's more of a well, yeah, of course we're doing this kind of a thing. So I am doing, I would say for new, people that I'm getting clientele, I would say closer to 50% is for purposes of prenups.
I think
And I would
that's
say,
so important.
yeah, I would say too, I think the younger generations are also a lot more on board with the idea of prenups. So it's not necessarily just the people who are having their second marriages, but I think a lot of younger people who are having their first marriages, as you said, more again, they're not nearly as taboo. And I think the utility is appreciated a lot more. And I think that younger couples are much more willing to have those uncomfy financial conversations before they get married and understand, how much that can help them. And I think a lot of the romance of getting married from a financial perspective is maybe becoming a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for, pragmatic, maybe.
I like it. I like it. Okay, so Kara, we always end our show with action items. We are big believers of takeaways where people can actually wrap this entire episode into their head with three simple takeaways. So, what I'm asking you tonight is to give us three takeaways that someone should know about financially complicated or complex divorces.
Sure. So the first one, as we talked about with JLo, depending on where you live, your divorce might not be a 50-50 division of assets. And so I think that's just really important to make sure you're talking with your lawyer about to understand because it's not going to be straight up 50-50 everywhere you live. So I think that's helpful to have that knowledge going into a divorce case. The second action item would be that there can be assets like Magic Mike in a marriage that don't necessarily show up on a tax return or on a balance sheet for a business. And they're what we call in the divorce world intangible assets or things we can't necessarily see. But just because they're intangible doesn't mean that they don't exist, nor does it mean that they don't have a value. And so if you have any inclination that there might be some assets like that, very, very, very important to raise those concepts with your divorce attorney. And then the last takeaway I would say for people getting ready to go into a divorce process is the concept of maintenance or alimony is not necessarily a given. And I think there's a lot of facts and analysis that goes into whether you're going to be a candidate for maintenance or alimony, whether you have to pay maintenance or alimony, and for how long you might be a candidate if you are one at all. And so I think that understanding that I'm not going to be taken care of for the rest of my life simply because I married somebody wealthy is very important and empowering at the very beginning of a divorce so that you can understand what my future might look like going forward.
Those are good. I like that. Let me ask you one more question. For someone who does not have a prenup and they're starting this divorce process and they're listening to everything that we just said and they're like, well, shit. How would you help them reframe their mindset? Or is there anything that they, beyond asking their attorney in the state that we're living in, is this equitable division or, how does this work out? What should they be looking out for? And what would be their first to do to kind of frame their mind in the right place?
So I think that something that's very helpful is if at all possible, especially if you're not the spouse that has the access to the financial information, is to get your hands on a tax return. And even if it's gibberish and mumbo jumbo and you don't understand it, having the tax return and being able to share that with your lawyer at the very beginning of a conversation, I think can be very educational for you and for your lawyer too, because it can show a lot of what is at stake and help you kind of get your arms around a lot of what will be at issue during your divorce case.
I like it. It's good. It's good stuff. Kara, this was such a fun conversation. I love how we were able to get some celebrity chit chat gossip stuff out and wrap it all up in this beautiful divorce package for people who are in Colorado and are thinking to themselves, man, if I could have an attorney like Kara, guess what, you guys, you can have Kara. Tell everybody how they can find you and what the first step would be in working with you.
Absolutely. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Kara Krobak, KaraChrobak. So if you're going through a divorce or if you have friends who might be, or if you're a estate planner, wealth advisor, or agent who's looking to just build your network, I would love to connect.
I like it. And we will also give direct links to everything that we need to link about you in the show notes. So, guys, have no fear. You can one little click away and you will be able to connect with Kara directly. Kara, thank you so much. We'll let you go now so you can get in your pajamas like I'm already in. But thanks so much for hanging out and talking with us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you guys.